Another aside on human behavior and why the technology behind Bitcoin is such a big step change related to marginal changes. If we go back to this example of Visa and MasterCard, they get a court order to stop processing transactions in a certain jurisdiction, and then they comply with that order because their cost structure would be adversely affected if they didn't. Even though Visa and MasterCard are multinational companies, they're not going to give up their entire American business just because of this one court order. Or maybe they would if they saw a certain return on investment to doing it, but it would be quite difficult to envision that scenario, right? It'd have to be some client that offered political value or marketing value or something weird. So for the most part, they'll just say, yep, regulatory capture was taken away from it. We're going to do what makes us profitable. Whereas Bitcoin miners might get shut down individually, but collectively it'll still work. Well, let's go back now to Visa and that whole why don't they, right? So why don't they act like Bitcoin miners and just say, whatever, like, we'll take you guys on. Almost any question that begins with why don't they, the answer is cost. Why don't they just do this? Because it costs too much money. That applies to so many things in life. It's not just a business thing. And what's fascinating about Bitcoin, the technology, is you have this same scenario, right? Like, why don't they just do this? It's not intuitively low cost, the way the Bitcoin network operates. That you could essentially have so many nominally almost sacrificial transaction processors, in the sense that some can be vulnerable to regulatory capture and could be shut down. But the fact that shutting them down won't necessarily stop whatever regulatory body is trying to stop means they're less likely to try to stop it. And we see that already, right? People have tried to make their own monetary systems, or we've had things like e-gold, or and they've just been shut down once they became competitive. But there's no ROI to shutting down Bitcoin in the same way. So now we can kind of flip that question, right? When you say, why don't they? Well, why doesn't the state shut down Bitcoin transaction processing? Cost. The return on investment's not there for them. It's not clear that they would actually shut it down. And they might actually, wake more people up to the fact that this technology works. Now, it doesn't stop them from doing other things that have a perceived ROI. I'm sure you've seen like the China bans Bitcoin headlines or other looming regulatory concerns. Well, there's a big return on investment for certain people for putting a certain message out there that costs almost nothing. And then you get some feedback, right? Like, oh, did that work? Are people behaving differently? Like, there's ROI on putting messages out. But why don't they shut down Bitcoin in the same way that they have shut down other things? It's cost. Doesn't mean that there won't be larger attempts. It doesn't mean that there won't be more experimentation. But fundamentally, just the way that the incentives are aligned, it's not necessarily worth a regulator's while to shut them down with the same tools and tactics that they've used successfully with other monetary alternatives to their own monetary monopoly.